You've seen them in stores, on hunting shows, even in your buddy's backyard. Deer feeders. Do they really help grow bigger deer? Or are you just training them to show up for a free meal? Today, we're gonna break it all down. The pros, the cons, and whether deer feeders really are a game changer they claim to be. So today we're gonna talk about why you should be using feeders. What are the pros and cons of some of the types of feeders out there? What are some of the drawbacks to the feeders that you often don't hear about? And ultimately how we think they could help you grow bigger and better deer. Why even use a deer feeder? Well, I think it's a great opportunity to target the species of animal that you're looking for to feed and to eliminate waste. See, oftentimes when you just pour feed on the ground, two things happen. Everything in the woods eat it, and after a rain, the feed spoils or rots. So feeders can be a great way to target the deer, get all the resources and all the feed to the deer, and ultimately keep the weather from ruining a lot of feed, wasting a lot of money. There are a lot of great feeders out there, and there are a lot of types of feeders, but there's three main categories: a gravity feeder, a trough feeder, and a spinner or a caster. The gravity feeder is a great way to minimize the exposure of feed that you have at any given time, and even more importantly, a great way to eliminate non-target species consuming the feed, like raccoons or hogs. The gravity feeders are a great feeder for just the deer to get to, unless it's poorly designed, but we can talk about that a little bit later. A trough feeder is probably the cheapest way to go, but it's open to anything eating it that can get up in the trough. And if the trough has not been built well, the weather can get the feed wet. But it's a great feeder because it's a little bit less invasive for sometimes the big bucks to come in and eat out of it. And then the spinner I think is the most economic way to feed. You can control the amount of feed that you throw out, but the feed is on the ground, and if the deer don't consume it before weather, it tends to rot. So there's pros and cons to really all the feeders. You just need to identify what your goals are and what you want to achieve in feeding. One of the other things you should look for in a feeder is how weather resistant is it? Like some gravity feeders, they're made of metal and not plastic, which solves the rodent problem, but they're riveted and they potentially leak. A leaky feeder is probably one of the worst things you'll ever have to deal with, because if water gets in the feeder, the feed in it's gonna rot and it is gonna be a mess to clean out. Troughs are also something to pay attention to. Not every trough is built equally. Some troughs, people overlook the sides. And if you get a wind that blows rain in from the side, you're also gonna have a trough full of wet feed and rotten feed. And even spinners, sometimes the base of the spinner will accumulate moisture or hold water, and that feed will begin to get clumped up, sticky, tacky, and moldy. So guys, when you're thinking about feeders, think about how weatherproof or weather resistant it is, and I think you'll have better results. Another element to feeders is cost. So, man, the cost of feeders really does scale from one extreme to another. Some really cheap feeders, they fit the bill. They do what you want, they take care of the situation, and they work. And then some feeders are really, really expensive, especially the metal ones and the really big ones. So what's the difference? Why a cheap feeder over an expensive feeder? Well, there's a couple elements to think about. So cheap feeders, simply, man, you're just on a budget. It's what you can afford. That's great, that's awesome. Or sometimes it's okay to get away with a more economic feeder because you spend a lot of time around that feeder. You can fix it if it breaks, you can replace it if you need to. Say a feeder just in your backyard, you see it and you're around it every day. Now, expensive feeders, and the main reason they get expensive is the material they're made out of and how big they are. Well, why do I need a big, huge feeder? We always like to talk about if you're a destination hunter, if your property is 2 hours from your house, 6 hours from your house, even 12 hours from your house, you want to make sure that you have a feeder that will hold the amount of feed that you need, the time that you need before you can get there again. Because we tell people all the time when it comes to feeding deer, you don't have to keep your feeders full, just don't let them go empty. So having a big feeder, if you're a destination hunter, if your property is far away from where you live, could be a key factor. And you're like, well, man, it's super expensive. Well, think about the trips that you're gonna have to take to keep feed in that feeder. And sometimes that justifies the extra cost. So what size feeder should we go? Well, that's a whole nother concept in itself, and it really, again, goes back to how often you're getting to the feeder. Again, we don't want your feeder to go empty. It doesn't have to stay full all the time, but don't let it go empty, because remember, you have a 200-day growing season and you want feed in that feeder all 200 days. Our template that we follow is how often you can get to your feeder. We have found that a 500-pound feeder tends to serve a lot of people, especially guys who have a larger piece of property. But again, if you frequent your property more often, then you can get away with a smaller feeder. And sometimes that's useful because if you're spending less money on that feeder, you could buy more feeders and target more areas. But the reality is, if you're not gonna get to your property, your farm, more times than not, you wanna go with a bigger feeder. And then the other variable about the feeder size that a lot of people overlook and they don't consider is, if you're in this for the long haul and you want to implement a supplemental feeding program on your property and introduce feeders, the reality is you're gonna have generational feeders. What does that mean? The first year you put that feeder out, deer are going to eat out of it. Mama's gonna eat out of it. Well, the next thing you know, mama's got fawns, a lot of times two. And those fawns see mama eat out of that feeder over and over again. So they're gonna eat out of that feeder. A little time goes by and now you've got 3 eating out of the feeder. Now you have 6 eating out of the feeder. Now you have 12 eating out of the feeder. You get my point is, you're going to continue to have more and more deer on your property on that feeder because they see the behavior of their mom eating out of that feeder the year before. So consider that. Consider, hey, maybe I don't need a 500-pound feeder this year. Maybe I just need a 200-pound feeder. But the reality is, after a couple years, you're probably gonna see, man, that feeder is getting empty very quickly. I need a bigger one anyways. So consider that when you're making a decision on how big your feeder is, how often you're gonna visit the property, and knowing that the number of mouths you're gonna feed is gonna increase year after year. There's a lot of great feeders out there. However, we found one that we really love, and it's a gravity feeder. We believe it solves a lot of the negative aspect to feeding, like non-target species and waste. One of the biggest challenges to feeding is raccoons. Raccoons create a lot of waste, they consume the feed, they mess in the feed. There's just a lot of negative aspects around raccoons. So when I'm looking for a feeder, that's the first thing I always look for. How raccoon-proof is this feeder? And the Still Outdoor feeder that we sell, and it's the only feeder that we currently sell, is the best solution for that. They simply can't get to the feed. Also, that feeder is very well designed. It is all welded, no rivets. It means there's no leaking. You won't ever have any issues with water getting to this feeder. It's an all metal feeder, so rodents can't chew through it like some plastic feeders. Now, metal feeders are more expensive than plastic feeders. The return to us is significantly higher. Raccoon resistant, waterproof, rodent resistant. The Still Outdoor feeder that we sell, for us, has been the best solution for an all-around approach to feeding our products. If you want to know more about that feeder, click the link below. There are a lot of great feeders out there. The most important thing is feed your deer. If you like this type of video and you want to see more, click this one.